Good morning and welcome to this video on the introduction to English speech sounds. We are dealing with consonants and we were in the middle of fricatives. As we said in the previous video, fricatives are friction consonants. They are called as fricatives because there is a close approximation stricture, which would mean that the active articulator comes very close to the passive articulator. It doesn't make a contact but leaves a small gap in between so that the air that is coming out from the lungs can pass through it. To ensure that the air passes through this narrow gap between the active and the passive articulators, the soft palate is raised to shut off the nasal passage of air. Vocal cords might vibrate or might not. Accordingly, the sounds are called as voiced and voiceless. So with this basic introduction to fricatives, let's move ahead to the discussion further. The first set of fricatives that we discussed in the previous video was f and v. F as in fan, v as in van are the labiodental fricatives that we discussed. Then we talked about the dental fricatives and as in thin, as in this. So we have to pronounce it very lightly. Between the two teeth, the tongue should come slightly, maybe touching the upper teeth just once, and the air should pass through the gap that is present between the tip of the tongue and the upper teeth with friction. Hence, they are dental fricatives. As we discussed, is voiceless dental fricative and is voiced dental fricative. Today, we will take the discussion further. The next set of fricatives that we have is s and z, as in sit, S-I-T, sit. During the articulation of this sound, the soft palate is obviously raised to shut off the nasal passage of air. And in the oral cavity, the tip of the tongue comes very close to the upper teeth or the alveolar ridge to form a narrow space through which the air that is coming out from the lungs would pass with an audible friction. While the s sound is pronounced, the vocal cords are drawn wide apart and hence it becomes voiceless. So the three-term label for the description of s as in sit is voiceless because the vocal cords do not vibrate, alveolar because the tip of the tongue comes very close to the alveolar ridge or the teeth ridge, and fricative because a close approximation stricture is observed and the air passes through the narrow gap with audible friction. Distribution wise in the English words, it occurs in all the three word positions, word initial, word medial and word final positions. As you could find in the examples, S-I-N, sin, word initial position, B-E-S-I-D-E, beside, word medial position, and M-I-S-S, miss, is word final position. The examples to practice sound is, let us look at these examples. S-E-E, see, S-I-T, sit. Listen and repeat after me. S-E-L-L, sell. S-A-T, sat. P-S-A-L-M, L is silent here, psalm. Psalms, P also is silent here. For P and S, P is silent. L and M, L is silent. Psalms are the songs that are sung in praise of Lord Jesus Christ. S-O-N-G, song. S-I-N-G, sing. S-O-O-T, the black soot that forms on the surface because of its exposure to the fire is called soot. S-O-N, sun. C-E-R-T-A-I-N, certain, certain. This is the sound of central long vowel. S-O, the diphthongs begin from here. S-O, so. S-O-U-N-D, sound. S-I-G-H, sigh. S-O-I-L, soil. S-O-W, so. S-U-I-T, suit. S-A-M-E, same. S-A-Y, same. S-E-R-I-O-U-S, serious. Note the repetition of the diphthong serious. Twice it is repeated. S-A-R-A-H, Sarah. The first one is a diphthong. Sarah. S-O-A-R, soar. S-O-R-E, soar. T-H-I-S, this. Never pronounce this as this or this. Never allow the her sound to come over there. It is this. L-E-S-S, less. P-A-S-S, pass. Note the aspiration of per. G-R-O-S-S, grows. C-O-U-R-S-E, cars. P-L-A-C-E-S, places. S-C-A-R-C-E, scares. C-E-A-S-E-S, seizes. Seizes. That's right. Look at the same slide and repeat all the words and its pronunciation for a better practice. The next sound that we have is a counterpart of S sound, which is called Z. Z as in Z-O-O, zoo. That's right. During the articulation of this sound Z, the soft palate is raised to shut off the nasal passage of air. The tip of the tongue comes very close to the upper teeth or the alveolar ridge to form a narrow passage through which the air that is coming out from the lungs passes with an audible friction. During the pronunciation of Z, the vocal cords vibrate. As you could see, if you put your tip of the finger on top of your vocal cords, you could feel the vibration over the Z. Pronounce Z, it's softer. Vocal cords do not vibrate. Pronounce Z. The vocal cords do vibrate and the heaviness is felt on the tip of your fingers. So the vocal cords vibrate during the articulation of this sound. And hence the three-term label for Z as in zoo is voiced, vocal cords vibrate, alveolar, teeth ridge or alveolar ridge is involved, fricative, because the air that is coming out from the lungs passes through the narrow gap between the active and the passive articulators with friction. Distribution-wise, in English words, Z sound occurs in all the three positions. Z-I-P, zip, initial position. L-A-Z-Y, lazy, medial position. M-A-Z-E, maze, final position. Very less number of examples you find. Those words that take up Z as in their spellings will take up this sound. Z-E-A-L, zeal. Z-E-S-T, zest. D-E-C-E-A-S-E-S, diseases. Diseases. That's right, diseases. Z-O-N-E-S, zones. You can pronounce S, which is in the word final position, as Z, because all the sounds that are used are voiced. Z is voiced, O is voiced, N is voiced, so S automatically becomes Z. Zones. The same logic applies to the next two words also. S-C-I-S-S-O-R-S, scissors. And R-E-S-E-R-V-E-S, reserves. Reserves. That's right. The diagrammatic representation of S and Z sounds are as following. As you could see, the soft palate is raised to shut off the nasal passage of air. The tip of the tongue comes very close to the teeth ridge. Can you notice it? So the air that is coming out from the lungs, shown in the form of arrows, is coming out continuously through the narrow gap between with audible friction. For S, the vocal cords do not vibrate, and for Z, the vocal cords vibrate. That's right. The next set of sounds that we have is sh. Sh. Yes, it's easier for us because we do have it in our language as well, as in S-H-I-P, ship. The most important part of this pronunciation of sh sound is that many of the Indian speakers or non-native speakers might have a sort of confusion with s and sh and continuously try to replace sh with s and s with sh, which will cause not so acceptable pronunciation. I would advise the students to take up tongue twisters. What are tongue twisters? Tongue twisters are those which keep an involvement of twisting sounds so continuously that when pronounced for a longer time will enable you to pronounce the sounds properly. She sells seashells on the seashore. But the seashells that she sells on this seashore do not belong to this seashore. Do you understand? A sort of sound, seashells, is repeated so many times that you automatically, when you start pronouncing these tongue twisters, your tongue and your oral organs, the active as well as passive articulators, will become quite free to pronounce the sounds in the respective way. So practice more for s and sh sounds. Never confuse between both. Don't bush, not bus. Shape, not save. So practice it more for the proper pronunciation of sound and sh sound. Because for s, it is alveolar sound. Only the tip of the tongue comes closer to the teeth ridge. But sh, the soft palate is raised to shut off the nasal passage of air. The tip of the tongue comes very close to the teeth ridge, and the front and the blade also are drawn towards palatation. The palate is involved, the alveolar ridge is involved, and hence this sound is palato-alveolar, whereas sound is alveolar. Sh sound is palato-alveolar. Vocal cords do not vibrate when you pronounce sh, and hence it is voiceless. So the three-term label for the description of sh sound is voiceless because the vocal cords do not vibrate, palato-alveolar. Remember, where did we get this palato-alveolar word? That's right. The affricates also are palato-alveolar, ch and j. What happens in the pronunciation of ch and j? The tip of the tongue makes a contact with the teeth ridge. The front and the blade of the tongue almost make a contact with the palate. Because there is a contact and a slow release with audible friction, it's called affricate. And here, there is no contact. That's the only difference. The tip of the tongue comes very close to the teeth ridge. The blade and the front of the tongue also move very close to the hard palate region. They don't touch, leaving a small gap in between so that the air that is coming out in the lungs passes through the gap with audible friction. And that is how you pronounce sh, ch, affricate, palato-alveolar, sh, palato-alveolar fricative, alveolar fricative. Did you notice the difference? Practice it more for appropriate pronunciation. Now, sh sound occurs in all the three positions, distribution-wise in English words, as you find in shine, shine, initial position, ashes, ashes, medial position, and trash, trash, final position. Let's practice for a few more words. sheaf, sheaf, ship, ship, shell, shell, shadow, shadow. I'm sorry, there is an A missing there, shadow. sharp, sharp. shock, shock. shaw, shaw. shoes, shoes. shirt, shirt, the central long vowel. shut, shut, the back vowel. From here onwards, the diphthongs begin. shake, shake. show, show. shy, shy. shout, shout. shear, shear, shear. That's right. share, share, share. Pronounce the diphthongs properly so that your pronunciation improves a lot. shoo, shoe, to shoo off the birds. sure, 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 the diphthong. fish, fish. cash, cash. Note the aspiration of cash. bush, bush. marsh, marsh. A-S-H, ash. S-Q-U-A-S-H, squash, squash. That's right. M-A-S-H, mash. L-A-S-H, lash. V-I-C-I-O-U-S, vicious. It's an important word, vicious. P-R-E-C-I-O-U-S, precious. W-A-S-H, wash. And T-R-A-S-H, trash. Practice these words more for a proper understanding of sh sound. Now we move ahead to the counterpart of sh sound, which is zh. Zh. We don't have this sound in our language. So we tend to mispronounce this word zh as z. So P-L-E-A-S-U-R-E. The pronunciation of it is pleasure. Aspirate per and pronounce zh. Pleasure. But most of the non-native speakers tend to pronounce it as pleasure. Z. It's not z, it is zh. Make it palato-alveolar. Because during the pronunciation of zh, as in pleasure, the soft palate is raised to shut off the nasal passage of air. In the oral cavity, the tip and blade of the tongue are raised towards the alveolar ridge. Not only that, the front of the tongue is also raised in the direction of the hard palate to form a narrow passage so that the air that is coming out from the lungs passes through this passage with audible friction, and hence it is a fricative. The vocal cords here vibrate. For sh, we said it don't vibrate. But for zh, the vocal cords vibrate, thereby producing the sound. So, zh, as in pleasure, the three-turn label will be voiced, palato-alveolar, fricative. Voiced because the vocal cords vibrate, palato-alveolar because the palate and the alveolar ridge are involved in the production of the sound, and fricative because an open approximation, or rather the close approximation stricture is been observed, and the air that is coming out from the lungs passes through this with audible friction. Distribution wise, zh occurs in the initial position and the medial positions only. It doesn't occur in the word final position in English. As you could observe, G-E-N-R-E, genre, genre. It is genre. Maybe in the American pronunciation, there are also genre is pronounced. L-E-I-S-U-R-E, leisure. The typical Indian pronunciation is leisure, but the RP pronunciation is leisure. Let's practice a few more words. S-E-I-Z-U-R-E, seizure, seizure. P-L-E-A-S-U-R-E, pleasure, pleasure. Aspirate per, pronounce je properly. T-R-E-A-S-U-R-E, treasure, treasure. Aspirate ter, pronounce je properly. E-N-C-L-O-S-U-R-E, enclosure, enclosure. That's right. L-E-I-S-U-R-E, leisure. P-R-E-S-T-I-G-E, prestige, prestige. Normally, Indian pronunciation is prestige. So, just give it a thought, it is prestige. G-A-R-A-G-E, garage, garage. R-O-U-G-E, rouge. And B-A-R-R-A-G-E, barrage, barrage. Refer to a dictionary and find out more number of words that have the pronunciation and the use of zh. Practice it more. Those sounds that are not there in our language are to be practiced better and more for a proper pronunciation. The diagrammatic representation of sh and zh is as following. As you could see, the tip of the tongue is moved very close to the teeth ridge. Did you notice? The front and the blade of the tongue also are taken very close to the hard palate region. The soft palate is raised to shut off the nasal passage of air. So the air that is coming out from the lungs passes through this narrow gap with an audible friction, and because the soft palate is raised, that becomes an oral sound. Because the tongue comes very close to the hard palate and the teeth ridge, both are involved, it's called Palato-alveolar. And because with an audible friction the air is coming out, it is called fricative. For every sound or every word that we are using to describe the sound, we have to know the meaning of it so that it becomes very easy for us to understand and keep in mind. The next sound that we have is, now this is quite easy because it's a very commonly occurring sound in Hindi and various Sanskrit derived languages. Every sentence ends with, like, you give a diphthong to it and pronounce it as hai. Hai. Slightly nasalized we make it, but in English it is oral. The soft palate is raised to shut off the nasal passage of air. During the articulation of her, the air from the lungs escapes through a narrow glottis, which is between the two vocal cords, with an audible friction. As you could see, nowhere in the oral cavity you could find that the active articulator and passive articulator come closer to each other. But you find it exactly in the glottis region. Glottis is a narrow opening that is present between the two vocal cords in your voice box. Now these two are little held apart so that the air coming out from the lungs passes through it with audible friction. So it is as in H-A-T, hat. Because the vocal cords are held wide apart, obviously it's a voiceless sound. So the three-term label of as in H-A-T, hat is voiceless because the vocal cords do not vibrate, glottal because it is coming out from the glottis region straight away, and fricative because the air that is coming out from this glottis has got an audible friction. Distribution wise, we could find that in English words occurs in the word initial and word medial positions only. It does not occur in the word final position. As you could find in the examples, H-O-U-S-E, house, house, that's right. B-E-H-I-N-D, behind, behind, that's right. In many of the examples, H letter that is used remains silent, and we shall be dealing with it in the examples stated below. Let's practice with the examples. H-E-A-T, heat. Repeat after me. H-I-L-L, hill. H-E-N, hen. H-A-T, hat. H-A-R-D, hard. Notice that R sound is never pronounced before the consonantal position. R sound also is never pronounced if it is occurring in the word final position. H-O-R-N, horn. H-O-P, hop. H-O-O-F, hoof. H-U-T, hut. H-U-R-T, hurt. The central long vowel, hurt. From hereafter, the diphthongs begin. H-A-Y, hey. H-I, hi. H-E-L-L-O, hello. H-O-L-D, hold. H-I-G-H, high. H-O-W, how. H-O-I-S-T, hoist. H-E-R-E, here. H-A-I-R, hair. B-E-H-A-V-E, behave. H-E-A-D-A-C-H-E, headache. H-A-R-E, hair. H-A-M-M-E-R, hammer. B-E-H-O-L-D, behold. C-H-I-L-D, H-O-O-D. Now the first H is silent. Childhood, childhood. That's right. H-A-N-D, hand. H-A-N-D-K-E-R-C-H-I-E-F, the piece of cloth that we carry in the hand. Handkerchief, handkerchief. H-A-R-M, harm. Very good. Practice these words and many more for a proper pronunciation of sound. The diagrammatic representation of H will be as following. As you could see in the diagram, the soft palate is raised to shut off the nasal passage of air. the air that is coming out from the glottis, which is an opening between the two vocal cords in the voice box, comes out with audible friction. As the vocal cords are wide apart, it's a voiceless sound. So, as in HAT, hat, is a voiceless glottal fricative. With this, we come to the end of the discussion on fricatives. There are 9 fricatives in English, f and v, labiodental fricatives and v, dental fricatives and z, alveolar fricatives, sh and zh, palato-alveolar fricatives, and the pairless, which is a glottal fricative. Thank you very much for being a part of this video. Stay tuned for the next videos.